students. This is Danielle Reitz, and I just wanted to go over a little bit of the story with you, give you a little bit of background information that might help you understand it and be further able to explore and think about and write about the story. So, The Luck of Roaring Camp is by Bret Harte, and hold on, I can't make my. There we go. And a little bit about Bret Harte is he was born in 1835 and died in 1910. He's from New York, but he moved with his family to California, and there were quite a few people kind of doing this at that time. Although the Northeast was the most populous area of America during this time, there was this new wave of people settling in California. He kind of bounced around between jobs. He was an editor for a newspaper, a typesetter, had some government jobs, and he wrote fiction and nonfiction. And really, what he was known for, what people, at his peak of popularity, what they liked about him, is that he really brought these characters from the West, from California and the western part of America to life. And this was especially true for a northeastern readership who had not been to that area, who was not familiar with it. In our modern age, a lot of people travel and we can see pictures of California and it's in real time and things like that. But during this time, California was very distinct. It was very far, still is pretty far, from the Northeast, and it was like a whole different place. So Harte was known for bringing these characters from that area to life in a way that was appealing to Northeasterners who were his readership. And he was first published, his stories, in the Overland Monthly magazine, which you might think of as like the Atlantic or, just a very popular magazine for people to read. And of course, since this was the days before TV and even, a big Barnes and Noble on the corner or Amazon where you could go get your books, if you wanted some form of entertainment, reading was the entertainment. And so, you would pick up these magazines and you'd talk about what you read in them. So he had a pretty big readership during this time. And he's kind of distinguished, even though there were other people who were writing during this time and, writing regionally, writing about things interesting to people, he had this ironic perspective that, his Northeastern readership often didn't really pick up on, but that critics really liked. And the Northeasterners who are reading this, or people who are unfamiliar with California who are reading his works, they often loved this, these cliches we have now, like the noble gambler or the hooker with a heart of gold, pretty woman kind of cliche. That was even alive then, is that they wanted to believe, um, that yeah, there were some rough edged people in California and in the West and settling these very primitive areas, but they really had good hearts. They were just unrefined, uncivilized. And some of his works, you can even see in The Luck of Roaring Camp, he kind of pokes fun at this idea, that Cherokee Sal, the way they treat her. I mean, even though they do end up loving this baby that she has, is that they're not very sympathetic to her. They're not very caring. Before the baby is born, they're shooting people in the street, and, it's not really like they're just, it's not really the portrayal of, oh, all they need is, this little baby and they're going to turn all good. Um, so, though that is part of the story, there's also this little ironic undertone sometimes that, kind of winks at people like these guys are not good guys. Historical context, I already talked about a little bit, which is that the West was still in the process of being settled. It wasn't a metropolitan area, it wasn't an area where there was a lot of civilization. And, you know, Hart and Twain, and there are some other regional writers in this area or in this time that you're going to read about next week, and you'll see them talked about in the I think it's called Regional Writing or Regional Writers video from American Passage's website. Hart and Twain are kind of the first people to really, or the first writers really, to break it big and write in this genre of capturing people in their local environment and playing up on the setting. So regional writing explodes during this time because it's an expression of the realist impulse, and realism deals with this idea of portraying things as they are, not embellishing. It's rebelling against previous kind of popular writings which favored on like the ideal or the romantic, the pastoral, writing about, rolling hills and how wonderful the individual was. But realist writing and regional writing, which is, a kind of realist writing, um, really focus on a lot of detail, the everyday things that people deal with, their psychology, why they deal with things. Um, and so part of the agenda here is, yes, to create something that's a work of art, but also to preserve a way of life and come to terms with the changes industrialization was bringing. So people in the Northeast are being industrialized. We're seeing more and more manufacturing type businesses popping up, and technology, not as we know it, but technology at that time was starting to move pretty rapidly, and moving people out of a more rural way of life, or maybe even just panning for gold, agriculture, and moving more towards a metropolitan way of life. Um, and so I think a lot of writers during this time see this change, and they're interested in capturing these places that have been untouched by industrialization and just have their own flavor. Some other major works by Bret Hart. He worked for a year to write for the Atlantic Monthly, which is now the Atlantic, so it still exists, this magazine. I think that should read 1871, not 1971. Sorry for my typo. He wrote the novel Gabrielle Conroy, which sold well but wasn't very well liked by critics. Two Men of Sandy Bar, which was not successful. And then with Twain, he wrote Ah Sin, which was also not successful. So we see the peak of his popularity really being, in the 1970s, the early 1970s. These are some discussion questions, and I think some of these are also in our discussion for this week. But I just like to pose these to get you thinking, to maybe you want to pause the video at this point and kind of think, what are your answers to these questions? What do you think? Um, so you can read these on your own. I'm not going to go through them. Well, maybe I will go through them all. The first one says, read the first 3 paragraphs of the story. What impression do you get of the camp? And if you want to pause now, I might, talk a little bit about this, but I don't want to overrun your thoughts. So, a lot of the camp, is described as ne'er-do-wells and really harsh um, people who are living there. They don't care much for each other, so it's setting the stage for that. It's also very realistic in the way that it's described. There's a lot of detail, um, not a lot of, romantic overtures and talking about how beautiful things are or how ideal they are. It's very nitty gritty. Number 2, is this story humorous? If so, how does Hart make it so? How is its humor similar or different from Twain's? So I thought it was interesting. There are some parts, and I don't have them marked right now in front of me, but that I did think the story was humorous, and you could kind of spot irony. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie. It's kind of from the 80s, I think, 3 Men and a Baby, but it reminded me of that in some ways. Like, oh, look at these, crazy guys trying to mother this baby. Or even Mr. Mom, that's an 80s movies too, I think, with Michael Keaton, but just kind of pokes fun at the ineptitude of men, especially men who are not very civilized, trying to raise a baby to be a nice baby, nice person. 3, what is the significance of the title? So, luck and fate play a big role in the story. Um, so, what do you think? Do you think, is it just the name of the baby, or does it have some wider significance? After all, these are gamblers, and to them, luck is very important. Both the baby luck and luck in a broader sense. And then that kind of ties in with 4, is the baby's christening just a joke to the camp, because these are people who really believe in luck, but luck is kind of the opposite of God or fate. Um, so it's kind of strange that these men, again, who have no Christianity to speak of or anything, want to christen the baby. Um, why would they even bother? What does it mean? 5, why do you think the men want to keep the baby and change for him? So, what prompts them to care when they haven't cared about anything else? 6, one critic interprets the story as a parody of a biblical text, a retelling of the gospel story of the Nativity. Can you find places that support such an interpretation? Do you agree? So, the gospel story of the Nativity is Mary and Joseph ride into town. Mary has a baby. It's in a manger, so on and so forth. Does it, ring true to you that there's some kind of connection there? And number 7, although this is considered realist literature, there seem to be moments of romanticism also. Do you agree or disagree? And the video sheds a little bit more light on what romanticism is, but remember, it's the idea that when writers are writing, they're writing about the ideal, not things as they are, but as things as romantic. Not necessarily romantic like lovey-dovey romantic like Valentine's Day, but romantic in what are our dreams, what are our aspirations, what do we hope for people, how could life be, kind of writing the best version of things possible. Possible writing prompts. So these might be things that, if any of these really snag you, that you might want to write about in your literary analysis essay, or even further on, if you could find a point of comparison contrast in your literary analysis essay number 2. Number 1, what motivates the men to keep and raise the baby? 2, how does the story exhibit both characteristics of romanticism and realism? 3, Hart's original audience would have balked if not been outright scandalized about prostitutes and roughneck miners. Yet his stories, especially the Luck Aurora Camp, were very well received. Why do you think that is? This would require, number 3 would require a lot more research about the time rather than the story, so that might be a little harder to do. 4, explain the significance of luck in the story. And so that could be a good paper, I think. Themes, remember, themes are just, they don't have to be lessons, but themes are ideas that are pronounced in the story. So parenthood transforms people, the good of the West, ethics even among roughnecks, the birth of a child transforming the world. Again, that goes hand in hand with that critic interpretation that this is an allegory for the Nativity. Or maybe not an allegory, but it, is very similar to it. Symbols, illusions, motifs. Here I just quickly brush upon these terms. These are literary terms. And I don't expect you to always use literary terms in your essays, although if you do, that's great, and use them correctly. I do expect you to have familiarity with these from ENC 1102. So if it's been a while since you've taken that class, you might need to brush up on them. I think I did link to some of those terms somewhere in our first or second week. But if you have your 1102 books still, they should be there as well. So symbols, remember, are things that represent bigger ideas or other ideas. They're things in the story often. So a child could be a symbol of luck, could symbolize the West, could symbolize starting over. Allusions are things that refer to things outside of the story. So often these are anything with a footnote could be an allusion. anything. We do this in popular culture all the time. If we talk about something, trying to think, like Family Guy does this and South Park all the time. They refer to books or movies or other things outside of the world of the show. And of course, I can't come up with one offhand right now. Illusions. So they mentioned Raphael Sanzio, I believe, is a painter. Romulus and Remus, who are from Greek mythology. And motifs are just things that appear over and over again in the story. And these can overlap. So you can have illusions that appear over and over again. You can have illusions that are symbols. You can have motifs that are symbols. But things that we hear or come up over and over again are luck, swearing, fights, God versus atheism, nature, and guns. And there's my works cited. I just consulted the actual story and then our section in the book that deals with a little bit about Bret Hart and the story itself. So I hope this is helpful to you, this video, and I've tried to include some other videos for the semester and just links to things that help you to understand the context for these stories a little bit better. And really those sections right before the short stories are great for it in our book. They kind of lay a little bit of the history and a little bit about the author that might help you contextualize the stories. And what else? And I hope they just help you to think through it, because I know sometimes if I read a story and then I just move on, I always miss so much. It's really in the thinking about it afterwards, whether in writing or talking with someone, that I start to understand more of the story and I start to really appreciate what it has to offer. And that's how you kind of also know what you might want to write about for your literary analysis paper, because if, as you're going through these videos or as you're going through the discussion posts, you find something that triggers something for you where you go, oh man, I could write a lot on that, or you read somebody else saying something and you go, oh, that's a good point, I could really expound upon that and explore that, then that could help you. All right, so hopefully we will be talking again some point this semester, not just over video, but maybe you'll come visit me during office hours, whether virtually or in person. Have a good day.